Ready to level up your Tudor history game? Then don't miss Forging a Queen, Catherine of Aragon Before England. This 6-week online course dives into the fierce, fearless life of young Catherine before the crown, before the heartbreak. Led by Dr. Emma, who basically lived in the Spanish archives for a decade and a half, this is not your typical history class. Let's go forge a queen. Visit the show notes to sign up.
This is the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I'm very pleased to welcome back once again, Adam Pennington. Welcome.
Hiya. Thank you again for having me back. It's lovely to be here.
I'm excited to have you because we're going to talk about three ladies that I think have, well, I want to say two for sure we know have made some type of impact on English history. One I feel like has been living in the shadows for centuries. And today we are talking about the Grey sisters, aren't we?
We are, yeah, particularly the lesser known two, Catherine and Mary. They are fascinating figures. And I think that people may come away from this going, my opinion of Elizabeth I is somewhat tainted now. Hopefully that will be part of what people leave this. Not to say that Elizabeth was a bad queen, far from it, but this was not a window of her reign that is particularly one to be celebrated, shall we say.
It's not really attractive, is it?
No.
I don't know if you're comfortable with this, but as I alluded, the sister Mary Grey to me is the one that I don't know anything about. She has lived in the shadows of her sisters forever. And I feel like, who is she? What was she about? I don't know. Are you comfortable starting with Mary?
We can do. Yeah. I mean, I think because she's the youngest and her story ends last, I think it makes maybe more sense to go with Catherine first,
right.
But happy either way.
Yeah, let's start with Catherine because, when it comes to Catherine, I'm intrigued with her because she married a Seymour. I mean, how cool is that?
She did. Yes, and she married a Seymour in secret, which is the big thing.
Yeah, Seymours like to do that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating about both of these sisters, actually, and a slightly odd, really, is that we have confirmed dates of birth for them, but we don't have a confirmed date of birth for their infinitely more famous big sister Jane. And it's just one of those quirks of history, I guess, that we just don't know. We know Jane was the eldest, and we know that she was around 16 when she became briefly the queen, but that's all we know. Whereas Catherine and Mary have confirmed dates of birth. Why that is, I can't say, but it's a bit of a random one. But yeah, that's how we know their ages. And there were 5 years between them. So Catherine was born in 1540 and Mary 1545.
And Jane was born in like 1536, maybe roughly we could say.
Yeah, 1536, 1537 is the sort of well, that makes sense based on how old she was when she died. But again, it's all guesswork.
Yeah.
We can say she was probably, I think the historians tend to go with the summer of 1536, but that's just an educated guess as best as I know.
Okay. All right. So for those who are unfamiliar with Catherine, where do you want to start with her story?
Well, I think probably a good place to start is just to also underpin what underpins the story is why these women have royal blood. Because the Greys most people know of Lady Jane Grey and they know that she was queen. They think for 9 days, actually it was 13 days, because she is queen from the moment Edward VI died, which was on July 10th. July 6th, and it was proclaimed on the 10th. So actually she was the queen for 13 days, officially speaking. But the reason that she had a right to the throne and the same right that passed through her sisters is that they were the nieces of Henry VIII, because they were the daughters of Frances, who was herself the eldest daughter of Princess Mary Tudor, the younger sister of Henry VIII. So we're talking about the next generation on, effectively, of royal cousins after Henry VIII's children. And under the will of Henry VIII, obviously when Henry VIII produced his will, in the last few years of his life. Obviously, Edward, his son and heir by his third wife, Jane Seymour, is heir apparent, but following her is Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, then Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and then we have Jane Grey. For some reason, slightly unknown to us, Henry VIII decides to just cut out his nieces. So his nieces, because that's actually, I should have said, Jane, Catherine, and Mary are great nieces of Henry VIII. It was their mother that was the niece. But for whatever reason, Henry VIII cuts his niece Frances and her younger sister Eleanor out of the line of succession and passes the crown on to them after his children. So we then have Jane, Catherine, and Mary. And after Mary, we jump to Margaret, who was the daughter of Eleanor Clifford, the younger daughter of Mary Tudor. I hope that's all making sense. What that means is that after the king's children, these girls are the first in line to the throne. And that makes them, under the terms of Henry VIII's will, akin to modern standards of Prince Harry and Prince Archie. That's how you would. Catherine Grey was the Prince Harry of the piece, basically. And yeah, they because of Henry VIII's will being quite vague in some respects, you know, the whole cutting out of the Scottish line is never really explained, even though they had a senior claim over the Grey girls. It's never really explained why he does that. A big reason is probably that the Grey girls are born in England. The Scottish line are predominantly born in Scotland. But yeah, they're raised as great nieces of the king. They are royal. They don't have the princess title, but they're certainly prominent figures at court, for sure.
So, what did their education look like? I feel like we hear so much about Jane's education and very little about Catherine and Mary's. So, can
Yeah.
you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, as best we can tell, they were educated well, but not nearly. They weren't nearly as inherently smart as Jane. Jane is, I think we can safely say, was probably something akin to a genius, actually. Incredibly intelligent, spoke many languages, I think about 8, and was actually described as being more intelligent than her cousin Elizabeth. So Jane was an extremely accomplished young woman. Now, maybe that was because she was the heir, she was the eldest, that her education was just all the greater. But actually, I think that there is a clear insight here that Jane was just much more studious, much more bookish. When we look at the records, certainly Catherine is described as being a bit more frivolous, not being as committed. Sadly, we have very little information about Mary. There is such a gap in the girls' years that Mary we don't really know much about her education. She would have obviously had one as a young noblewoman of royal blood, but we know that Jane she outstripped her sisters by miles. And it's a bit of a trope, I suppose, or a bit of is it too reductive? But Jane was viewed as very bookish. Catherine was famously very beautiful. That was commented on a lot. Mary, bless her, was actually and was once described as the ugliest person at court. She had what so mean, but
It is terrible.
So mean. But I have to admit, if you look at her portrait, this is clearly not a great beauty. Sorry, Mary, but this definitely the case if the portrait's accurate. But she was also she had some form of deformity. We can't be totally certain exactly what. She's described as a crookback, so that would suggest that she had scoliosis of the spine, which, as we know, Richard III did as well, generations earlier. So, yeah, so Mary was very small. She was described as being the smallest person at court, actually, and very ugly. So, bless her, she didn't have much going for her beyond her royal blood. Catherine is the opposite, very beautiful by the standards of the day. And by the time we get to Elizabeth I's reign, and actually the same with Queen Mary the First as well, Catherine is the heir apparent. She's absolutely the heir apparent to. So, well, I mean, there for a time under Mary's reign, Elizabeth is still an illegitimate daughter of Henry VIII. So some looked to Catherine as the senior claimant of Mary's throne. Now, Mary actually always favoured someone that wasn't in Henry VIII's will, her cousin Margaret Douglas, because Margaret Douglas is a Catholic, and the
Yeah.
two women were very, very close. But under Henry VIII's will, Margaret Douglas wasn't in the line of succession, even though she had a superior claim to any of the Grey girls if you follow primogeniture. But we have a situation where in certainly by Elizabeth's reign, Catherine Grey is the Prince William of the time. She is the Prince William to Elizabeth's Charles III is the best way we can describe Catherine, but she is not treated that way at all.
No, she is treated like I don't know, like Cinderella, maybe.
Kind of. I think there's two big things going on. One, she's female, and two, she's very pretty. And I know that that's incredibly trite, but we she is Elizabeth clearly disliked her. There is quite clear dislike from Elizabeth towards Catherine Grey, and the fact that she was her under the terms of Elizabeth's father's will, clearly Elizabeth's heir apparent. I just think Elizabeth struggled with that. She was famously extraordinarily vain. She considered herself a, she was no feminist. This was not a woman who saw she saw herself as an exception to the rule among women. She upheld patriarchy in many respects. And when we look at the women of the court who had claims to the throne, because there were other claimants, and by and large they were women, Elizabeth really kept them downtrodden. She didn't like them there because I think they probably, as far as she was concerned, they were a ready-made affront. You know, they were younger than her, and I just think Elizabeth struggled with that. And then obviously when the drama explodes around what Catherine does, things get even worse.
It's love, but I also hate this part of Elizabeth's character because I have always seen her as this petty woman who, it almost seemed like she didn't want the women around her to be happy, but really it was a deflection. I think it was her showing what she was unhappy about. She couldn't just marry whoever she wanted, could she?
No, she couldn't. And I also think that Elizabeth was many things, but she was certainly not incautious. Elizabeth's whole reign, I think she had that constant fear that she was going to be usurped. She knew that there were certainly people of the Catholic faith would have happily seen Mary Queen of Scots in her place. And I think that for Elizabeth, whilst yes, her behavior towards women, particularly women of royal blood, was at times very unkind, and she really, Catherine, I think more than anyone, suffers. You can also slightly, I suppose, understand where Elizabeth was coming from in respect of trying to protect her country and to protect her throne. So as much as her behavior was at times quite cruel, and it undoubtedly was, there was always that measure of self-preservation in there and keeping the crown safe, keeping England safe. And I think that there was just always the shadow of her illegitimacy as it was perceived, and the fact that there were so many people out there who had a claim to the throne. So, yeah, I mean, Catherine, obviously, to get to the root of it, Catherine was a lady in waiting to Elizabeth. Not a particularly close one, but she was a lady in waiting. She actually her husband Henry Edward Seymour, the first Earl of Hertford, was actually not her first husband. She'd been married years earlier when she was just 12. Again, a lot of people don't know this, but Lady Jane Grey's wedding to Guildford Dudley was actually a triple wedding. She on the same day, Jane and Guildford got married. Catherine married Henry Herbert, the son of the Earl of Pembroke. And then a sister of Guildford's, Catherine, marries Henry Huntingdon, the great-grandson of Margaret Pole. Actually, that marriage is dissolved when Jane Grey's tenure as queen flops. But then years later, Catherine Grey is introduced to Edward, the heir of the Duke of Somerset, the brother of Lady Jane Grey. They fall in love and they marry in secret, which is it's, as I say, it's like Prince William marrying in secret today. It was shocking that she married in secret.
Yeah.
And yeah, Elizabeth did not react well.
Well, no, I mean, if it happened in present day, I think the same reaction would happen. She's in the line of succession. Now, here she married a guy without permission from the queen.
Yeah.
What's she to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shocking thing to have done, because as the heir apparent, she absolutely, I mean, members of the nobility had to seek approval from the Queen to marry. Catherine she is a member of the nobility, but she's also royal and the first in line to the bloody throne. So marrying in secret is just the biggest no-no. She she manages the prize mistake that she makes actually is to not have a witness. She has one, and that's Lady Jane Seymour, a sister of Catherine's now husband. But that is one witness, and actually Jane Seymour dies not long after. So there's not much on paper to prove that this marriage was both legitimate and lawful. Many would argue it was unlawful because it didn't have the Queen's approval. Unbeknown to Elizabeth, Elizabeth is fond of Edward Seymour. She sends him off on effectively like a sort of brushing up on his skills course in Europe. She's like, go off to Europe for a bit on a bit of a gap year, so that you can improve your status as a nobleman. Before he does that, he gets Catherine pregnant. Catherine is on a progress with the Queen, and obviously a pregnant woman's stomach begins to grow.
Yes.
And at 8 months pregnant, I mean, she managed to conceal it for that long. At 8 months pregnant, she turns first to Bess of Hardwicke, who comes down on her like a ton of bricks and says, well, I'm not having anything to do with this. And moreover, you've now implicated me. So she then turns, I suppose, quite fairly, she turns to a man she thinks is going to at least be understanding, and that is Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who is obviously Elizabeth's great favourite, but we must also recall and remember was the brother-in-law of Jane Grey.
Yeah.
So there is that distant marriage relation between Catherine and Robert Dudley. He is again, he's not as unkind to her as Bess of Hardwicke, but he sort of scolds her and says, "Okay, but leave it with me. I will manage this with the Queen." And he tells her. Elizabeth goes berserk, absolutely furious, and orders Catherine's imprisonment. And she also recalls Edward Seymour back to England, and he is soon locked up with Catherine as well. Now, during her imprisonment, she gives birth to a son, Henry, and that immediately causes an issue because we've now got a boy who is second in line to the throne. And as we know, this is an era where it's all about the boys. You know, getting sons is the crucial thing. And suddenly there is this baby boy who is second in line to the throne, at least under the orders of Henry VIII's will. So that alone is a big problem for Elizabeth. It gets all the more dramatic and slightly hysterical when we discover that Catherine and Edward, her husband, were able to enjoy conjugal visits. They somehow managed to convince a jailer to let them see each other. And before you know it, Catherine is pregnant again and gives birth to another boy.
Right.
So it's, I mean, talking about like a sort of shit show isn't even in it. This is a nightmare for Elizabeth. So at that point, that is when Elizabeth says, right, enough's enough. And she orders Catherine out of the Tower of London, but into a permanent house arrest.
She's like, I need to keep you two separated.
Yes. You are both clearly far too virile.
I mean, I love, I love that Catherine and Edward's story. Just seems like such a love story, and I'm such a sucker for love stories like that. But
Yeah.
it does make you wonder, had she given birth to girls, how different things would have played out.
Yeah, it's a real what if of history. Um, I think the fact that they were boys was undoubtedly going to cause more of an issue for them because, as we've already said, this is an era when getting sons is so crucial. And we're also, when you look at the other claimants to the throne at this time, it is almost exclusively women.
Yeah.
So the fact that there are suddenly these two boys, that does change things. And I think that's also why Elizabeth maybe comes down so heavily on Catherine because, well, but the contradiction also is that the first thing she does is to annul the marriage. So Elizabeth has the marriage annulled, therefore it takes those boys out of the line of succession because they're viewed as being illegitimate, so they are ostensibly no longer a threat. But even though she's done that, Elizabeth's hand is still visible because despite doing that, you could argue, well, they've been neutralized. Let them, she could have either sent the whole family into Europe, or she could have just let them live in the country, not causing much fuss. They're out of the line of succession now, just let it go. But she doesn't. She separates them for the rest of their days. She separates Catherine from her husband and her eldest son. She has a younger son kind of by her side, but he's being raised by guardians. But Elizabeth, yes, she doesn't allow them to spend any time together. And Catherine is eventually uh, given over to into house arrest she was looked after by one of her uncles, John Grey, then into the household of William Peter, and it's there that things really begin to go downhill for Catherine.
Wow. Yeah. She's separated from the man she loves and pretty much her children. And she's still very young at this point, isn't she?
Yeah, yeah, she's 27.
Yeah. So young. How
So young.
depressing.
Yeah, and as I say, just kind of it does feel to our eyes and ears, it feels really petty from Elizabeth. It feels quite cruel. Equally, these are royal boys, whether they're out of the line of succession or not. Kind of, on the one hand, yes, you can argue they've been neutralized, but Henry Tudor wasn't in anyone's line to the throne. No one. I mean, he was, but 50th or something ridiculous. He still managed to become king. And I think that will have always been playing in the back of Elizabeth's mind. She herself came to the throne illegitimate.
Yeah.
So the fact that these two boys are ostensibly neutralized, they're still boys of Tudor blood. So Catherine is permanently separated from husband and eldest son. She dies at the age of 27, officially of consumption, but there are some suggestions that actually it was a self-induced starvation, that she became extraordinarily depressed owing to what she was going through and decided in the end to take her own life by effectively going on hunger strike. That is a theory. There is some evidence to support it, not a huge amount, but it kind of does feel believable, I think.
Well, when you hear the story, it seems completely believable.
Mm,
I can't help but think about the fact that Elizabeth had all these female heirs,
mm,
heiresses, maybe.
yeah,
She had all these women floating around her who were her possible successors. And then one of those women had some illegitimate sons that she set aside. It makes me wonder how different. I always say I hate the what if stories, but it does make me wonder how different it would have been had they not been made illegitimate, or if she had recognized them later on
yeah.
and had made them her successor versus James of Scotland.
James. Yeah, and that's, I suppose, again, it's slightly weird, isn't it? Because Elizabeth could have said, well, I don't want, we all know really, I think with hindsight, that she never truly intended to marry, because I think Elizabeth knew that if she did marry and if she produced a son, what was to then stop people going, well, actually, now we've got this boy, can you step aside? Is effectively what happened to Mary, Queen of Scots. But that's why she didn't then say, actually, this is a perfect get out of jail free card for me, I suppose. I can reign for the rest of my days and comfortably leave my throne to an English-born boy of royal blood that the country will support. That was, and moreover, he was in the line of succession if you followed Henry VIII's will. But I always feel like Elizabeth always favoured the Scottish claim. I just think she always favoured it, and I think she favoured it for the main reason being that by the time we get to the end of her life, James VI of Scotland has been on the throne of Scotland for many, many years. He is well established. He knows what ruling looks like. And again, as we sort of touched on earlier, Elizabeth was always thinking about the security of her realm. And I think for her, passing the throne on to an established, whether we like it or not, male, with impeccable royal blood, had never been, wasn't ever named illegitimate, was just smoother for her. But yeah, I do agree that there could have been this moment where she said, "I will acknowledge these boys and nominate them as my heirs, and let their mother and them live a normal life." I think that could have been just as powerful as that could have been just as powerful in not in neutralizing them as it was in discarding them. She could have actually embraced it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that just the presence of Catherine, I think she was just jealous, and I think we see that somewhat in what happens with Mary. Um, but yeah,
I think it's so ironic that Elizabeth has James as her successor after executing his mother for wanting
I
the
know,
same thing.
I know it is ironic, and there are some who say, "Oh, was it her way of saying sorry?" I don't think it was for a second. I think
Sorry, I
I don't
killed your
think
mom. You can be
yeah,
king.
here's the crown. I just he had the best claim, and as I said a moment ago, was probably the best person to take it on just by disposition, experience, etc. I think he was always going to be Elizabeth's successor. But it is, yeah, it's a huge irony that in the end it's the son of the woman who is beheaded on Elizabeth's orders.
Yeah. Okay, well, you hinted at Mary. Now I want to talk about Mary.
Yeah, there's something about Mary.
There
Um,
is.
yeah, so as I've already explained, she was physically a very different figure from her sister Catherine. She's described as the smallest person at court. She's described as ugly. She's probably got scoliosis of the spine. And these factors, I think, actually are a big reason why she is just in the way that Catherine is acknowledged as Elizabeth's heir by a lot of people. She has her supporters. There is, although she's never treated as Prince William is today, there was just this undercurrent of no, she is the heir apparent. That just seems to not have ever been the case with Mary. And Elizabeth was, I mean, treated her badly, but in the end welcomes her back. And I can't help but think, is it again kind of touches Elizabeth's vanity, where Catherine was beautiful, vivacious, lit up the court. Mary is this small, unattractive, dumpy little character who just wasn't a threat physically to Elizabeth. And I make a habit of not psychoanalyzing people from 500 years ago, but I think Elizabeth will have seen her as just not on the same page as Catherine. The hysterical thing about Mary's story is that she makes the same mistake as her sister. She marries in secret. I mean, you just think, for Christ's sake, what are you doing? She does do something that her sister doesn't do. She has three witnesses, so that certainly makes the marriage more official. She marries a man called Thomas Keyes, and the marriage is really inappropriate on a few levels. Firstly, he's more than double her age,
Ooh.
and he's 6'8". So he is openly described as the tallest man at court. He's described as being a giant. She is the smallest person at court. So immediately they just look a bit odd as a
Yeah.
couple. He's more than twice her age, and he's really quite low in in social status. He's the son of a minor member of the gentry, not the nobility. He's Elizabeth's Sergeant Porter, and but they fall in love. They marry in secret. He's also got 8 children from a former marriage. So there's really not a lot that Mary would gain from this, other than they clearly loved each other. Otherwise, why would they do it? I think is fairly obvious. Uh, but she has 3 witnesses to the marriage, so it makes it more official than Catherine Grey. But even so, Elizabeth is furious. She famously said, "I'll have no bastard keys laying a claim to my throne." And she throws both of them in, well, Mary into house arrest. Thomas Keyes, bless him, he goes into the Fleet prison,
Ooh,
not even the Tower.
yikes.
And I can't remember where I read this, but I seem to recall reading that for a time he was deliberately housed in a very small cell because he was this giant of a man. Um, and in the end, I think he was imprisoned for about 7 years in the Fleet, before he's eventually released. And after being released, he doesn't live very long. I mean, after they got married and Elizabeth discovered the news, Mary and Thomas never saw each other again. So she came down very hard on them. Mary is given over to house arrest. Now, the first couple of years of her house arrest were actually quite nice because she moved to the household of her step grandmother, Catherine Willoughby, one of the later wives of Charles Brandon, and she was treated nicely by Catherine. But she's then moved on to when Catherine Grey dies, and both of her young sons are taken out of the line of succession. Mary is suddenly bumped way up. And because of that, Elizabeth then takes the decision to keep a closer watch on her. And she's moved into the household of Thomas Gresham, the man who famously set up the London Exchange, the Royal Exchange. And him and his wife just really, she was just like a spare part. They really didn't want her there and made life quite miserable for her, really. And she is eventually, after I think 7 or 8 years, she, well, after Thomas Keyes, her husband, is released from the Tower, he dies not long after, and Mary sued the Queen to allow her to raise her stepchildren because some of those 8 children from his first marriage were still of a young enough age that they would need a mother figure, and Elizabeth didn't allow it. She sort of, again, she came down really hard. Uh, but eventually she is reconciled to Elizabeth's side. She's brought back to court and somewhat um, re yeah, gets her status back. But she's never treated really as a true heir to the throne in the way that Catherine was.
Wow. Every time I hear this story about the Grey sisters, it's heart-wrenching. It's unfortunate that the things turned out the way that they did for all 3 of them.
Yeah, and the irony as well with all of this, actually, especially with Jane Grey, is that Jane Grey could have become the queen in the end anyway, because Elizabeth dies without an heir. Had Jane Grey just had the whole drama of Edward's death and Jane's brief succession not been a thing, and it had gone to Mary, then it had gone to Elizabeth, then Jane was the clear heir apparent anyway. So for all we know, we could have ended up with Queen Jane.
Yeah.
Um, but that's obviously not what happened. But yeah, all 3 of them have a really sad life in many ways, and it all stems from who they were. I've been on your podcast before talking about Margaret Pole and her family and their downfall. Again, it all ties back to that royal blood
Yeah.
that runs in their veins. And it wasn't just them. I think that was the other thing is that another of the big claimants to Elizabeth I's throne was Lady Arbella Stewart,
Oh,
who
right.
was a granddaughter of Margaret Douglas. Yep, she was the daughter of Charles Lennox, so the younger son of Margaret Douglas. Arbella Stewart, so she's a claimant to the throne. Elizabeth treats her quite badly, again, Elizabeth, as was Elizabeth's wont. But this she Arbella Stewart also marries without royal approval, but this time it's James the First of England that she doesn't get the approval from. But what's comical about this, and even makes it even more dramatic, is that the man Arbella marries was Catherine Grey's grandson. So she marries one of the other successors, well, one of the other claimants. So it's even more dramatic. So,
Yeah.
even by the time of James the First, there is a grandson of Catherine Grey, marries effectively the chief claimant to James's throne outside of his children. So it just carries on. These people with royal blood who weren't the heir apparents really suffered by it.
I love how it continues to be the Seymours that crop up into these stories, making situations worse. They had a
Yeah, they
way.
really had a knack for it, didn't they? Of just turning up, and they were very grabby, the Seymours. You're going to have to invite. I'm sure she's been on the podcast before, but uh, Elizabeth, Dr. Elizabeth Norton has got a book coming out about Jane Seymour next year, and she told me when I saw her a little while ago that she's discovered loads of new stuff, and she said Jane's horrible. She's like she's not a nice person at all, and that's not a Jane Seymour we think of, is it? So you'll definitely have
No.
to have her on.
Oh my gosh. I have been like asking her, I swear, every 6 months. Is it time yet? Can you come on the show and talk about it? Is the book ready yet? Like, I am so anxious for this book because I just feel like she is going to blow our minds with what she has discovered. Because really, I
Yeah,
mean, who has dug that deep into Jane Seymour
yeah,
since,
because
like, when was the last book? Like,
yeah, well, she's perpetually viewed as the human form of beige, and I think based on what Elizabeth has discovered, there's clearly a lot more to this woman. And that's we think we all acknowledge there must have been. But yeah, the Seymours were quite a force. And when you mixed that with the Greys, I mean, again, the person that I think really screws Jane over the most is her own father. I
hmm.
mean, had he not thrown his lot in with Wyatt against Mary the First, I think it's fair to say that Jane probably would have kept her head. And it was just men and their ambition, and it was the daughters that paid the price. But
Yeah.
also under Elizabeth as well. I mean, as I said at the start of the episode, yeah, if this episode does anything, it will probably make people think twice about how decent a person Elizabeth the First was.
I
But yeah,
I keep trying to find redeeming qualities in her because I've always felt this way about her. Like, oh, Elizabeth, okay, everybody thinks she's so great. I'm not sure she's as great as everybody thinks she is.
yeah, yeah. She's been got many incredible skills and a great queen in many ways. But she could be a horrible woman when she wanted to be, and I think you see that most glaringly in the treatment, particularly of Catherine, because as we've discussed, there was every reason for her to celebrate these girls and Catherine's sons and just approach it differently, but she couldn't. And I think it was all driven from jealousy, insecurity,
Yeah.
and you could argue that that is understandable given her own childhood and path to the throne. But it does complicate matters somewhat, I think.
Well, when you start stacking the stories up, you have the Grey sisters, and then you even look at Bess Throckmorton and Walter Raleigh.
Yeah,
Like those two, another one who was, a lady of the queen who married in secret to one of the king's favorites or
yeah,
queen's favorites, like, of course.
yeah. Well, another one of the claimants to the throne of Elizabeth was Lady Margaret Stanley, who was the daughter of Eleanor Clifford. So Eleanor Clifford was the younger of Princess Mary's daughters, so the younger sister of Francis, the mother of Jane, Catherine, and Mary. So Eleanor Clifford's daughter Margaret is, by the time of Elizabeth I's reign, again quite high in the line of succession. She did not have any time for Margaret, and Margaret's eventually imprisoned when news breaks that Margaret's astronomer had been predicting the day that Elizabeth would die, so that Margaret could then take over the throne. And Elizabeth just, it's this bit of poison poured into someone's ear that makes its way to Elizabeth. Elizabeth comes down on like a ton of bricks. The astronomer is executed. Margaret is arrested and imprisoned. Elizabeth just did not like these women at her court, I think is what's really clear.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Adam. So here's my question of the hour for you. Just a random one. If you could go back in time to these events and observe, just like a fly on the wall, you could just observe what's going on. Which of these events would you want to go back to and observe?
I think the moment that Robert Dudley turns to Elizabeth to tell her that Catherine is married would be fascinating, just to see actually how much Elizabeth exploded. I mean, did the wig come off? Was she pulling out her earrings, preparing for a fight? That would be, that would be fun. But then equally, the moment Catherine turns to Robert Dudley and says, "I've made a big fuck up. I need your help." Uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that moment kind of crystallizes all of it, really. Um, it'll be really interesting to see if the stories about Thomas Keys and Mary's separate height and everything like that is that just a legend, or is there something in it? But yeah, I think when pushed, probably actually that, yeah, Elizabeth and Robert Dudley having that discussion.
I think I'd want to sit back in the tower and see how they were able to have these conjugal visits.
Yes, I know. Did they bribe someone? Was Edward Seymour, did he, carve out a little wooden key or something like you see in movies?
Right?
Did he jump in through the window on a rope? Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it would make for a good movie or a TV series.
It's a great movie. Yeah.
Oh, Adam, this has been so enlightening today. Thank you so much for chatting with us about the Grey sisters.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for the invite back.
And before I let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to promote everything that you're doing too. What do you have on your plate?
A lot. So, so for those who may not know me, I run the Tudor Chest, which is an Instagram account, and I also have my own podcast, the Tudor Chest podcast. But then in addition to that, I'm the co-director of Simply Tudor Tours, which is a historic tour company that we produce week-long, really curated in-person experiences. We've got one in a few weeks' time, which is the Rise and Fall of Anne Boleyn, which is kind of like our flagship tour. But next year, and there's still some spaces available, we've got a tour around Mary Queen of Scots. So that's up in Scotland, as you would assume. And then we've got a tour following Henry VII and Elizabeth of York on their progress through the southwest of England. So yeah, those are sort of ongoing things. The tour in a few weeks' time, yeah, that's just around the corner. And because I do all of the logistics and stuff, I'm now in that window of sending out menus and things like that, and all sort of quite logistic heavy stuff. But I love it. It's so much fun, and it's brilliant when people come, because invariably as well, it's largely an American audience who come to these events, and it's so brilliant for me as the tour guide to show these places that I call home off. It's lovely. So that's taking up a lot of my time at the moment, plus writing as well.
Well, yeah, you need to promote your book, first of all. I know the last time you were on the show, we talked about it, but I want to give you an opportunity to pitch it too.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my book that came out almost a year ago now is Henry VIII and the Plantagenet Poles, The Rise and Fall of a Dynasty, which is about Margaret Pole predominantly, and then her family, and how they went from members of the royal family under the reigns of Edward IV and Richard III to social pariahs briefly under Henry VII, to being stars of the court again under Henry VIII, and then it all come crashing down once again. And I was on your podcast to discuss that. It was a fascinating family to dive into, and that book is out now on Amazon, so please do check it out.
Yes, and I will include all of these links in the show notes for everybody as well. And Adam, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you again.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.